Annette Island Indian Reservation lies in the southernmost portion of the Alexander Archipelago in southeastern Alaska, about 900 air miles south of Anchorage. Rugged and mountainous, Annette Island is 10 miles wide by 20 miles long. Muskeg rainforests cover low-lying areas. There are lakes in former glacial valleys. Metlakatla is an indigenous community established on Annette Island in 1887 when residents moved from a settlement of the same name near Prince Rupert. The island was granted reservation status by the United States in 1891. With the threat of war in the Pacific, the United States Department of the Interior, prompted by the War Department, approached the Metlakatla Native governing body. On January 6, 1941, the U.S. was granted temporary consent for an airfield on the southwestern peninsula. Previous authorization by U.S. authorities for the Annette Island project had been given in July 1940. The original project called for construction of two 5,000-foot by 200-foot runways with a water-bound macadam surface with taxiways, aprons, and revetments, and a hangar with lean-tos as well as gasoline storage. Both runways were later widened to 300 feet and extended, one to 7,500 feet, the other to 6,000 feet. A seaplane ramp and aircraft parking area were built, as well as provision for a coast artillery battery, garrison facilities for the U.S. Army Air Corps, the RCAF, and the Canadian Army, as well as a 75-bed hospital. A road connected the airfield and Metlakatla, while docking facilities were built at Tamgus Harbor for military marine traffic to Ketchikan. In meetings in Washington, D.C., from December 1941 to January 42, and later, the U.S.-Canada Permanent Joint Board on Defense in Ottawa had agreed that Canada would militarily assist in the defense of Alaska. Canada had authorized the U.S. Army and Navy to establish facilities at the mouth of the northwesterly railhead of Prince Rupert to supply the U.S. forces in Alaska. The RCAF was concerned that its flying boat station at Seal Cove was inadequate to defend Prince Rupert. The United States had developed the Annette Island Airfield, 60 miles northwest of Prince Rupert, but did not have air combat units to support it. The defense needs of both countries coincided. Early in March 1942, in Seattle, the RCAF suggested temporarily deploying an RCAF fighter squadron to Annette Island. The U.S. welcomed the proposal. Near the end of April, an RCAF squadron, number 115F Squadron, flew to Annette Island with the unit's Bristol Bolingbroke. Western Air Command RCAF realized the Bolingbrokes were of limited value as a defensive aircraft, but the unfinished airfield at Annette Island hindered deployment of P-40 Kitty Hawks. The squadron completed its move from Pat Bay to Annette Island in early May 1942. Squadron leader Reno and his crews were met by a U.S. customs official who was bound by regulation. He refused to allow the Canadians to leave their planes until they paid duty on their aircraft, arms, and equipment. A frenzy erupted. Although invited by the United States to defend Alaska, the RCAF was being held hostage by the United States. The U.S. Secretary of State signaled from Washington that as distinguished flying visitors, the Canadians at Annette Island were exempt from customs duty. The Secretary of State remarked to his aide that after the war, this customs agent should be shipped off to a remote location in the Philippines. The RCAF squadron's ground parties had arrived by steamship in late April 1942, a week ahead of its aircraft. 2 weeks or so later, the squadron made its first operational flight in a Norseman regarding a reported submarine near Harris Island. On June 4th, one officer and 29 men of the number 112 Anti-Aircraft Battery, Royal Canadian Army, arrived with 2 Bofors guns for airfield defense. The squadron's designation changed in June 1942 to 115 BR Squadron, Bomber Reconnaissance. On July 7, 1942, a Bolingbroke returned to RCAF Station Annette Island, reporting an unusual but not uncommon incident. The weather was clear, visibility good, sea calm. The aircraft's second observer spotted a disturbance about half a mile off the starboard wing. The position was logged west of Prince of Wales Island. Turning towards the object, the pilots started a descent. The crew saw churning water and puffs of white smoke. On the first pass, a 250-pound anti-submarine bomb was released. It made a direct hit. No one could make a clear identification, but agreed on an object just below the surface, more than 100 feet long, cigar-shaped, with steering vanes and an elevator at the stern. Consensus was they had likely bombed a whale. Pilot and crew took a ribbing from fellow airmen. However, evidence endorsed the theory that a Japanese submarine had run aground and the captain was attempting to release it by blowing the tanks. The Japanese Imperial Navy's summary of official submarine losses noted that on that same day, July 7, 1942, the submarine RO-32 was off southern Alaska. It was attacked and damaged by an RCAF aircraft. The submarine was recorded as a loss because it was later sunk by a United States Coast Guard cutter. 2 days later, 2 United States Coast Guard cutters attacked and sank a Japanese submarine near the reported whale bombing. The submarine had been damaged and was having difficulty making headway. That Bolingbroke was officially credited with damaging the first submarine in attacks claimed by the RCAF under Western Air Command. On June 2, 1942, Number 8 BR Squadron had left RCAF Station Pat Bay near Victoria for Yakutat via Annette Island with 10 Bolingbrooks and 2 Stranraers. About 3 weeks later, Number 118 F Squadron arrived at Annette Island with 15 P-40 Kitty Hawks and 2 Lockheed Hudsons. When the RCAF arrived at Annette Island, facilities were minimal. No hangars, no offices, no barracks. Tents were the order of the day. The U.S. Army on the island helped all it could, but it was bound by the same shortages. One RCAF airman quipped, quote, "If you needed something, you made it yourself, stole it from the Yanks, or went without," unquote. Number 14 F Squadron's Kitty Hawks arrived at Annette Island in early March 1942 en route to the Aleutian Islands. Wing Commander A.D. Nesbitt, who had previously commanded RCAF Annette Island, wrote an historical narrative. He noted, "A circuit of the field is sufficient to indicate that this part of the island is entirely muskeg and that all construction requires rock fill." On taxiing in, one is surprised to see numerous well-camouflaged tents not evident from the air. These house the air and ground crews. Both sides of the runways are used as roads. The drive down to the main camp on the harbor takes only 5 minutes, but the road, in places, is constructed of wood. The camp itself gives the impression of being a boomtown. Sidewalks are crowded with both civilians and soldiers. The Post Theater shows first-run movies. At the bottom of the street, it is here that the RCAF barrack blocks are located. These are of one-story, prefabricated construction, 20 feet wide by 120 feet long, and heated by homemade oil stoves constructed from empty gasoline drums. The bottom of the street takes one down to the dock. Here the RCAF motor vessel Sakani calls 3 times a week with supplies and equipment from Prince Rupert. This road also leads to the seaplane ramp where the RCAF Norseman is kept for communication purposes. Food for the mess hall is obtained from the Americans, but the mess is operated by the RCAF. The runways are about 12 feet higher than the muskeg upon which they are constructed. Wooden walkways must be laid on the muskeg to all tents. No American aircraft are located on the station, but a small detachment operates from a tent on the east-west runway for servicing the numerous DC-3 transports which refuel at Annette almost daily. The 2 squadrons were replaced by number 135 F Squadron, arriving in mid-August 1943 with 18 Hawker Hurricanes, and number 149 BR with 14 Lockheed Vega Ventura GR Mark V aircraft. In November 1943, both number 135 and number 149 squadrons relocated to Terrace. The RCAF presence at Annette Island ended. The lessening threat to the West Coast saw a continuous reduction of military on Annette Island. The Army Airways communication system remained until after the end of the war, as well as United States Army Air Force units to service itinerant aircraft between Seattle and Anchorage. With the ever-extending range of transport aircraft, the field became redundant and eventually abandoned. The airfield on Annette Island had been only a temporary measure agreed upon in a time of war.